Hello, I'm Matt. People keep asking me to do a tutorial or explanation of some kind of how I go from this to this, how I get my water transfers onto my pedals. I'm doing a run of these Coral Vibes pedals at the moment. I don't know if you can see the little camera strapped to my forehead, so I can't quite see what you can see. And I'm on the last one, so I figured I would show you how we get from this point to this point. Yeah, here we go. Just move that out of the way. Well, in fact, you start with the design like this, which I've done using Krita. You can use Photoshop or anything. There's templates available online, or if you get in touch with me, I can send you the templates I use. They're not mine. I've found the templates online and been using them for a while. So you cut that out to get it to this point. And then get some water, dip that in the water, put it on there, done. I wish it was as simple as that. That's right, let's get this out of the way, let's get to it. So a few things to note: your water, you don't want it too warm. If it's too warm, your transfers will shrink when you put them into the water, which will cause all kinds of other problems. If it's too cold, then it won't release from the backing paper. So you've got to keep it, I like to keep it just a little bit warmer than room temperature. I don't have an exact temperature for that. Something else you'll need is some generic shop towel. You can use kitchen roll. I've been known to use toilet roll when I'm doing pedals for myself, and I'm not too bothered about the finish on them. With this one I'm doing everything as best I can. The other thing that I've started using is these sponges that are from a buffing wheel. I think it's the second hardest grade sponge that came with it. And that's for once you've got the enclosure, once you've got the transfer onto the enclosure, pushing out bubbles, flattening everything down, and just generally keeping everything nice. It saves going through loads and loads of kitchen roll. So I'm going to stick this in here now so it starts to release as we go. One other thing to note: when you put it in the water, it's going to try and curl either this way or this way. One thing you can do to avoid that: hold it by either side and just push it the opposite way, so make sure it bows outwards from the side where the design is, and that should help it. It's not exactly going to work every time, but it should help it to stay a little bit flatter. Once it's in there, just give it a bit of wiggle. I like to soften it up a little bit just by bending it backwards on itself. Leave that a second. So for this particular design, I've not fully sprayed the enclosure white. I've just given it a bit of a spritz, and it's just in case I miss any of the edges or the corners. When you put the transfer down, you've got to try and align everything else dangerously close to it, and basically you push everything up really slowly until it meets the edge, and then hope to God that it stays like that. That's really the best way to do it. You're going to be lacquering in between everything as well, just to seal the edges, because these transfers don't adhere very well to anything. That should be maybe about right now. One thing you can do to check: if you look at these bottom edges here, I'm not sure if camera's going to focus, it'll start to pull away from the edges on its own. If that starts happening, then just gently give it a little push. You're going to get water everywhere as well, so be careful what you've got underneath here. I have not got a load of wires there, just ignore that. I might get a towel actually just to cover them over in a second. Right, so that's not quite releasing yet, so I'm just going to put that back in the water for a minute. Other thing you can do, I don't know if this is recommended, but I've always done it and it seems to work. If you basically just roll it around on itself, bend it on itself a little bit, without creasing anything, just so you're rolling it. My theory behind that is that you've got your two layers and your layer of glue, and as you're bending it, you're basically causing it to do this, so it's helping release it. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea, but it makes sense to me. Yeah, that's releasing better now. You can see how that's coming away from the backing. So then we want to put it onto the enclosure. Sorry, I'm trying to keep this so you can see it as well as me being able to see what I'm doing. So all you're doing here, you're gently pushing it with your thumbs. If you press too hard, then you're going to end up pushing it all out of shape. So then what you do, if you've got a little edge here, and this is just up to the edge there, let's lift that up, just gently pull away, really gently. Right, I don't have enough of an edge here, so I need to push that off a little bit more. You've noticed that I've not bothered aligning any of these holes with the holes here yet. That'll come in a second. That's better. You can keep lifting these up and putting them down as much as you want, as long as you don't get any wrinkles in them. That seems okay to me. Right, another thing that I found super useful, this might glare out the camera a second, this is for lining it up. If you get a really bright light like this, you can hold it up to the light and see where your holes are. Make sure everything's aligned and where you want it to be. With this particular box, I've also got to think about the halo there, because that's cut out with an LED behind it and that's got the LFO flashing. So I need to be careful to make sure that's... I'm more bothered about that being aligned than the drill holes, to be honest. The drill holes are only really important if you've got dials behind them. Right, see, I can see through that now. I can tell that that's not quite in line. Another good way to do this is to use the camera on your phone, but I have my phone strapped to my forehead right now, so that's not going to work for me. Right, that looks okay to me. Right, and then you want to put pressure on as wide a space here as you can, so say 3 fingers, or even 2, I don't know, just like that, and then gently pull this away so that this side isn't sliding about anywhere. Right, when you get to about that point, get your sponge, or you can use your shop towel and just press it flat. And you're just pushing bubbles away. I won't be able to show you this on camera because I really don't think it's going to pick anything up. Try and get in. If you look at the light down here, I'm trying to see if I can find you some big bubbles. At the moment it's all just kind of speckled, but we'll get rid of the majority of that. That's not too bad. You always want to make sure you're pushing towards the edges as well, because you're basically pushing any excess water and excess bubbles out at this point. Using the sponge helps to get the edges down really nice and smooth without peeling anything. I only found this out with the sponge on these last couple of builds. I didn't have any kitchen towel to hand when I was doing the first one, because I'm an idiot and I didn't get it ready. And I just grabbed this because it was there, and it turned out to be really, really useful. So all I'm doing here is just going around the edges, flattening everything down, just making sure these edges here are all nice and flat and adhered to the box. You're not putting barely any pressure on with this, you're literally just dragging it over the surface. Any odd bits that you got with your scissors, this will take them off as well, which is really handy. I think that's probably about good. Right, and now I'm just going to have a quick check over to see if there's any major bubbles. You want to try not to touch this with dry hands, because you'll stick to it and just sort of drag up the edges and it can cause problems. Right, so that's that. So now we just need to go give this a quick spritz with the lacquer. Be back in a second, as soon as I figure out how to pause this. So we're back at my bedroom window. This is where I don't do most of my spraying. I usually do it outside, but for efforts of this video it's just easier, saves me going up and downstairs all the time. All you're doing here, you're just giving the edges of the box a tiny little spritz just to seal in all the edges. I really hope you can hear me with all this traffic noise. And that's it, just enough to seal the edges and then a quick spritz over the top just to harden the transfer. Right, we're back. This particular lacquer that I use, I happen to know that it dries ridiculously fast if you do it in really small layers like that. But, so I can go straight in with the next side of this, and by the time it's released from the paper that lacquer's already going to be dry. We'll grab the next side. I think I'm going to stop after this side and just show you the two and then come back to it when it's finished, because having this camera on my forehead and trying to do this is pretty annoying, to be honest. It's not the most fun thing. And plus, with these boxes being for sale, I don't really want to make anything more difficult for myself and, you know, potentially ruin them. So while that's releasing, I'll show you the difference between these two. So this is one of the first ones that I did, which I've deemed, I'm going to call this a B stock because it's not perfect. So if you compare these two corners, on the one on the left you can see, I hope this comes across on the camera, you can see quite a big overlap with the transfer. Like you can tell where the join is almost everywhere, whereas the one on the right, you can see a little bit, just try and pull that into focus, you see a little bit on the corner, but then when you come around the edge, it's basically invisible. And once you get the resin coat on there as well, it hides the join pretty much perfectly. You can see a tiny bit on the front there, but then on this one on the front, you can see it's completely misaligned. So like I said, this one won't be getting, or it might be getting sold as a B stock. I might do that a little bit cheaper at some point, or just keep it for myself as a spare. Whereas this one and the rest of these on here, they all need to look like this. They need to be pristine. Right, that should be more than enough time for that to release by now. The smaller the piece is as well, the faster it'll release from the paper. I think I've given that a bit too much time, but that's fine. Yeah, see, that's releasing really easily now. Right, so for the sides, it's basically the same principle. So what you want to do, line this up so it's basically where you want it to be. I'll be honest, I'm not prioritising the camera for this because I want these boxes to look right, so if you can't see what I'm doing, all I can do is apologise. So that's pretty much it. I've got a little bit of ink that's pulled off of the transfer there, but I'll be able to touch that in with a pen once it's all dry and you won't even be able to tell. So now that's in line. Let's put your 3 points of pressure again. Gently pull it out. There you go. I'll just give it a quick flatten with a sponge just to make sure it doesn't move as I pull the last little section off. You'll notice these corners aren't down yet. That's perfectly fine. They don't need to, or they won't go down until you've got the transfer down properly. Right, did you see how I moved it then? So now I'm going to have to realign that. Luckily it was only about 0.5 millimetre, but it's enough for me to notice. There's a lot of things that when you're building it you'll notice afterwards if it's wrong, but other people are never ever going to realise. But because you've done it yourself, it's you can't unsee it, you're always going to know it's there. One of the boxes that I did I've actually scrapped and started again from scratch, and it was all because I'd tried to polish the resin on top, because there were a tiny little scratch in there, tiny little scratch that you wouldn't have been able to see because it was pretty much going to be covered by one of the knobs. But I knew it was there, so I decided to try and polish it out and ended up destroying the finish on the entire box. I had to start that one from scratch, which I'm still pretty salty about. Right. One other thing you can do, if you need to, just wet your finger a tiny little bit, just if these aren't going down, and then you want to roll. You don't want to drag anything because you'll end up moving it, or you don't want to push anything, you just want to roll your finger over the part that's not going flat. You should be able to push that edge right down. There you go, you see how that's flattening out again now. Just give it a quick dab with the sponge. Right. Any remaining bubbles that might be there, you push that out with a shop towel. And there we go. So that's another side done. So there's a tiny little part where the ink's pulled away there, but I can fill that in with a pen, acrylic pen. And then it's the same principle all around. When you come to doing this side, you want to line it up with the top first. You can take a super sharp pair of scissors and cut off anything that may overlap there, but if you've measured your transfers out properly, that shouldn't happen. And yeah, that's basically it. So I'll come back in a second once this is all covered and show you what it's like.